Have you ever been home alone, maybe late at night, and heard a sound that just didn't belong? That one little creak of a floorboard, or a tap against a window that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. You try to rationalize it, right? It's just the house settling. It's the wind, it's the cat, but deep down, a primal part of your brain is screaming that something is wrong. That feeling of safety you have within your own four walls suddenly evaporates, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. You're no longer the master of your domain, you're just another creature, vulnerable and exposed. The three stories I'm about to share with you today are about that exact feeling. They're about people who were in the one place they were supposed to be safest, their own home, only to discover that they were not alone. These aren't tales of ghosts or supernatural entities, but something far more terrifying, the real flesh and blood monsters that can and do walk among us. These are stories submitted by viewers like you, accounts of moments when the familiar turned terrifyingly unfamiliar, and the silence of an empty house was broken by the undeniable proof of an intruder. So, turn down the lights, make sure your doors are locked, and prepare to question every little noise you hear from now on. Because after hearing these accounts, you might start to wonder what's really making those sounds in the dark. You might just start to believe that when you think you're home alone, you're actually the one who is being watched. These are three true, terrifying Home Alone horror stories. Our first story comes from a woman named Chloe. At the time, she was 19 years old and living with her parents in a quiet two-story house in a sleepy suburban neighborhood. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and nobody bothered to lock their doors. But on this particular night, Chloe would learn a hard lesson about a false sense of security. Her parents had gone away for the weekend, leaving her in charge of the house and their golden retriever, Buster. It was a Friday night, and Chloe had settled in for a quiet evening of binge-watching her favorite show. As the evening wore on, the house grew still. The only sounds were the low murmur of the television and the gentle, rhythmic snores of Buster, who was fast asleep at the foot of her bed upstairs. Around 11:30 p.m., Chloe decided to call it a night. She turned off the TV, did a quick check of the downstairs locks, and headed up to her room. She changed into her pajamas, brushed her teeth, and climbed into bed, Buster barely stirring as she settled under the covers. For a while, everything was peaceful. The familiar silence of her home wrapped around her like a comfortable blanket. Chloe was just on the edge of sleep, drifting in that hazy space between consciousness and dreams, when a faint sound from downstairs pulled her back. It was a soft thump. Not loud, not aggressive, just there. She lay perfectly still, her ears straining in the darkness, trying to place it. Maybe a book had fallen off a shelf. Maybe the ice maker had dropped a fresh batch. She told herself it was nothing. But then, another sound followed, a quiet, almost imperceptible creak. This one was different. This was the sound of a floorboard, one she knew well, the one at the bottom of the staircase that always groaned when you stepped on it just right. Her heart, which had been beating slowly and calmly just moments before, gave a sudden hard jolt in her chest. She was wide awake now, every sense on high alert. Buster, who had been snoring peacefully, let out a low, guttural growl, his head lifting from the floor. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. Buster never growled like that. He was the friendliest dog imaginable. His growl confirmed her deepest fear. That sound wasn't the house settling. It was a footstep. Someone was inside her house. Panic began to bubble up inside her, cold and sharp. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Had her parents come home early? No, they would have called. They would have turned on the lights and announced their arrival. This was quiet. This was stealthy. She strained her ears again, listening for any other sign of movement. For a long, terrifying minute, there was only silence. The kind of absolute heavy silence that feels like it's pressing in on you. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe Buster was just dreaming. She was just about to convince herself of that when she heard it again. Crack. Another step on the staircase, closer this time, slower, more deliberate. Whoever was down there was coming up. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over her. This was real. This was happening. Her bedroom door was closed, but it wasn't locked. The lock was old and flimsy anyway. It wouldn't stop anyone determined to get in. Her eyes darted around the dark room, searching for a weapon, a hiding place, anything. Her phone was on her nightstand. She reached for it with a trembling hand, her fingers fumbling with the screen as she tried to dial 911 without making a sound. As her thumb hovered over the call button, she heard another sound that made her blood run cold. It was a whisper, a man's voice, low and raspy, coming from just outside her door. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was chillingly calm. It sounded like he was talking to someone, or maybe to himself. Buster let out another low growl, a warning rumble deep in his chest. Chloe knew she had only seconds. She didn't press call. A new fear seized her. What if they heard the operator? What if that enraged them? Instead, her survival instinct kicked into overdrive. She slid silently out of the opposite side of the bed, crouching low to the floor. Her bedroom had an adjoining bathroom, and that bathroom had a small high window that led out onto the roof of the porch below. It was her only chance. Keeping her eyes locked on her bedroom door, she began to crawl. Each inch felt like a mile. The floorboards beneath her seemed to groan with every tiny shift of her weight. She could hear the soft scuffling of footsteps right outside her door now, and the gentle metallic click of the doorknob being slowly, carefully turned. She didn't dare look back. She pushed open the bathroom door, which thankfully swung inward without a sound, and scrambled inside, pulling it shut behind her. Inside the bathroom, her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she was afraid they would hear it through the walls. She climbed onto the toilet, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get a grip on the window latch. It was stuck. She pushed with all her might, a silent sob escaping her lips. Finally, with a painful squeak, it gave way. She pushed the window open, the cool night air hitting her face. Just as she was hoisting herself through the narrow opening, she heard the crash. Her bedroom door had been thrown open with such force that it slammed against the wall. She heard the man's voice, louder this time, angry and confused. "Where is she?" he hissed. Then, another voice answered, and the sound of it made Chloe's stomach drop. There wasn't one intruder. There were two. Without a second thought, she wriggled the rest of the way out the window and dropped onto the shingles of the porch roof. She didn't stop to think. She scrambled to the edge and leaped the 10 feet to the soft grass of her front lawn below, landing with a jarring thud. She didn't even register the pain in her ankle as she sprinted across the lawn to her neighbor's house, pounding on their door and screaming for help, never once looking back at the dark windows of her own home. Our next story comes from a man named Mark, who was in his late 20s and had just bought his first house. It was an older home, a fixer-upper with what the real estate agent called a lot of character. Part of that character was a large, unfinished basement, a sprawling space of concrete floors, stone walls, and exposed pipes. Mark's plan was to eventually finish it, turn it into a man cave. But for now, it was just a place to store boxes. And, as he would soon discover, it was also a place that held a deeply unsettling secret. Mark had been living in the house for about a month. He worked long hours, so he was often home alone in the evenings. It started subtly. At first, he would just get this strange feeling whenever he was near the basement door, which was located in a small hallway off the kitchen. It was a distinct, prickling sensation on his skin, the kind of feeling you get when you think someone is standing right behind you. He'd brush it off, telling himself it was just the new house jitters. Old houses make weird noises, they have weird feelings. It was normal. Then came the sounds. They were faint, almost too quiet to be sure of. Late at night, when the house was silent and he was sitting in the living room reading, he'd hear what sounded like a soft whisper. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the kitchen, near the basement door. He'd pause, strain his ears, and hear nothing but the hum of the refrigerator. He convinced himself it was the pipes, or the wind whistling through a crack in the foundation. Anything but what it sounded like. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger and the whispers became more frequent, if not any clearer. It got to the point where Mark started actively avoiding that hallway. He'd take the long way around through the dining room just to avoid walking past the basement door. He started sleeping with a lamp on, something he hadn't done since he was a child. The house no longer felt like his own. It felt like he was an unwelcome guest in someone else's space. One Thursday evening, Mark came home from work completely exhausted. He made himself a quick dinner and sat down to eat in the kitchen. As he ate, he heard it again. A whisper. This time it was clearer than ever before. It was a single, drawn-out word that seemed to slither up from beneath the floor. It sounded like it was saying his name. Mark. The voice was raspy, dry, and filled with a chilling intimacy. Mark froze, fork halfway to his mouth, every muscle in his body tensing. There was no mistaking it this time. It wasn't the pipes. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice, and it was coming from the basement. For a moment, he was paralyzed by fear. Every horror movie trope flashed through his mind. Don't go into the basement, call the police, get out of the house. But a different, more practical thought pushed through the panic. What if someone was hurt down there? What if a homeless person had broken in and was living in his basement? Against his better judgment, Mark grabbed the heaviest flashlight he owned from a kitchen drawer. and a tire iron he kept by the back door for protection. His heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs as he walked slowly towards the dreaded basement door. He placed his hand on the cold brass knob, took a deep breath, and turned it. The door swung open with a loud groan, revealing a set of steep wooden stairs descending into absolute blackness. He flicked on his flashlight, the powerful beam cutting a sharp cone through the oppressive dark. The air that wafted up from the basement was cold and musty, carrying the smell of damp earth and something else, something vaguely metallic and unpleasant. "Hello?" he called out, his voice sounding thin and shaky in the enclosed space. "Is anyone down here?" He was met with total, unnerving silence. Taking another deep breath to steady his nerves, Mark began his descent. Each step down the old wooden stairs creaked ominously under his weight. He swept the flashlight beam back and forth, illuminating stacks of moving boxes, old dusty shelves, and the labyrinth of pipes and ductwork that snaked across the low ceiling. The basement was huge, with several small, alcove-like rooms branching off the main area. It was the perfect place for someone to hide. He reached the concrete floor and stood for a moment, listening. Nothing. Just the sound of his own ragged breathing. He started to feel a bit foolish. Maybe he had imagined the voice after all. Maybe the stress of the new house and his job was just getting to him. He decided to do one quick sweep of the area just to be sure. Then he would go back upstairs, lock the door, and maybe even put a chair in front of it for good measure. He methodically checked behind the stacks of boxes and peered into the first two alcoves. They were empty, filled with nothing but cobwebs and dust. He moved towards the third and final alcove located in the furthest, darkest corner of the basement. As he got closer, that unpleasant metallic smell got stronger. He pointed his flashlight beam into the small, cramped space, and what he saw made him stop dead in his tracks. In the corner of the alcove was a small, dirty mattress, a few empty cans of food, and a pile of filthy blankets. Someone had been living down here. But that wasn't what made his blood turn to ice. On the stone wall above the mattress, scrawled in what looked like dried, rust-colored liquid, were words. There were names, dates, and strange rambling sentences, and right in the middle, in large, crude letters, was a single, terrifying phrase. "I see you sleeping." Mark felt a scream build in his throat, but it wouldn't come out. He was frozen, his flashlight beam fixed on the horrifying message. This person hadn't just been living in his basement, they had been watching him. The whispers, the feeling of being watched, it was all real. And as this realization crashed down on him, he heard a sound from directly behind him, a soft shuffling footstep on the concrete floor. He wasn't alone in the basement. Our final story tonight is from a college student named Sarah, and it's a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones we just can't explain. So Sarah was house-sitting for one of her professors, Dr. Albright, who was away at a conference for the week. The house was beautiful, a large, historic home filled with antiques and books, but it was located on a rather isolated road surrounded by dense woods. From the moment she arrived, Sarah felt a little on edge. The house was just so big and so quiet. The first couple of nights were honestly uneventful. Sarah spent her time studying, watching movies, and enjoying the peace and quiet. The silence of the old house was almost absolute, broken only by the occasional groan of the floorboards or the ticking of a grandfather clock in the main hall. She was starting to get used to it, to feel comfortable in the vast, empty space. That all changed on the third night. Sarah was upstairs in the master bedroom reading a book. It was just after midnight. The house was completely still. Suddenly, she heard a distinct sound from downstairs. It was the unmistakable sound of a footstep. It came from the foyer, right near the bottom of the main staircase. It was a heavy, deliberate step, like someone wearing boots stepping onto the hardwood floor. Sarah froze, her book forgotten in her lap. She sat in absolute silence, her ears straining for another sound. Was it Dr. Albright? Had he come home early? She listened, expecting to hear the jingle of keys, the flick of a light switch, or his voice calling out her name, but there was nothing, just the oppressive silence returning, thicker and heavier than before. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe a heavy book had fallen off a table. Maybe it was an animal outside. Then she heard it again. Thump. Another footstep, on the first step of the staircase. It was followed by a long, drawn-out creak as the old wood took the weight. There was no doubt now. Someone was in the house, and they were coming up the stairs. Panic flared in Sarah's chest. She quietly slipped out of bed and crept to her bedroom door, pressing her ear against the cool wood. She could hear them now, clear as day. Thump, creak, thump, creak. A slow, steady, heavy ascent. Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of terror. The bedroom she was in was at the very end of a long hallway. The staircase came up right in the middle of that hallway. Whoever was coming up would have to walk right past several other rooms to get to her. She backed away from the door, her eyes wide with fear, searching for a place to hide. The only other door in the room led to a large walk-in closet. It was her only option. She slipped inside the closet, pulling the door almost completely shut, leaving just a tiny crack to peer through. Her hiding spot gave her a direct line of sight down the long, dimly lit hallway to the top of the stairs. She held her breath, listening to the footsteps get closer and closer. Thump, creak, thump, creak. They were nearing the top now. Any second she expected to see a dark figure appear at the landing. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. There was one final heavy thump as they landed on the upstairs floor, followed by a loud groan from the floorboards. And then, silence. Complete and utter silence. Sarah waited, her body tense, her eyes glued to the top of the stairs. She waited for the figure to appear, to start walking down the hall towards her, but nothing happened. No one appeared. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The silence was absolute. There were no more footsteps, no sounds of breathing, no rustling of clothes. It was as if whoever had walked up the stairs had simply vanished into thin air the moment they reached the top. This new, unexplainable development was almost more terrifying than the footsteps themselves. A human intruder she could understand. This was something else. Slowly, cautiously, Sarah began to question her own sanity. Had she imagined it all? Was the stress of being alone in this big old house playing tricks on her mind? But the sounds had been so real, so distinct. She stayed hidden in the closet for what felt like hours, too afraid to move. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a faint gray light through the bedroom window before she finally found the courage to emerge. With her phone clutched in her hand, ready to dial 911, she crept out of the closet and peered down the hallway. It was empty. She forced herself to walk towards the top of the stairs, her heart pounding with every step. She checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place on the second floor. Nothing. No one. The entire upstairs was empty and undisturbed. Finally, she made her way down the creaking staircase, checking every step for any sign of what she had heard. When she reached the bottom, she did a thorough search of the entire ground floor. The doors were all still locked from the inside. The windows were all secure. There was absolutely no sign of a break-in. It was as if the footsteps she had heard had belonged to a ghost. Still shaken, Sarah called Dr. Albright to tell him what happened. After she explained the entire terrifying experience, the heavy footsteps coming up the stairs and then just stopping, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Dr. Albright finally spoke, his voice was quiet and somber. "Oh, Sarah," he said sadly, "I am so sorry. I should have warned you about the footsteps." He then proceeded to tell her that he and his late wife had heard them for years. They always followed the same pattern. A slow, heavy walk up the stairs, a final step on the landing, and then nothing. They never found a cause, and after a while they had just learned to live with their invisible and thankfully harmless guest. The thought of being in your own home, the one place you should feel completely secure, and realizing you're not alone, is a universally terrifying concept. Whether it's the tangible threat of a human intruder like Chloe and Mark faced, or the unexplainable, phantom presence that Sarah encountered, the violation of that sacred space leaves a scar. It makes you second-guess every creak and groan your house makes. It makes you eye the shadows in the corner with a little more suspicion. It reminds us just how fragile our sense of safety truly is. These stories serve as a powerful reminder to always be aware of your surroundings, even in the comfort of your own home. To trust your instincts, because that little feeling that something is off is often your subconscious mind picking up on details you haven't consciously registered yet. It's the reason we check the locks one more time before bed, and the reason a strange noise in the night can send a shiver down our spine. It's a primal survival instinct that we should never ignore.
It happened to a girl named Riley. She was 17, babysitting her younger brother while their parents were out for a late dinner. Everything was fine at first. The kid was asleep. She was curled up on the couch, texting and half-watching some random horror movie on Netflix. Ironic, she'd later think. Around 10:30 p.m., knock, knock, knock. She looked up. The front door. At first, she thought maybe her parents were back early. But then, knock, 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 again, louder. And this time she realized something odd. Their front door has a camera. She pulled up the live feed. Nothing. No one. She waited. 30 seconds. 1 minute. Nothing. She chalked it up to her imagination. But then, from the back door, knock, knock, knock. Her heart stopped. They don't even use the back door. She grabbed her brother from bed, locked him in the bathroom, and called the police. When officers arrived, there was no one, but muddy footprints led from the backyard into the woods behind their home. No sign of entry, no face on any camera, just
Derek was 22, had just moved into his first apartment. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom on the top floor of an old building downtown. One weekend, his roommate was away, so he had the place to himself. That Saturday night, he was gaming with his headset on when he heard something, a faint shuffle, behind him. He paused his game and stood there. The hallway outside his room was dark, still, silent. Then a low creaking sound, coming from the hall. He reached for his phone to turn on the flashlight, but as the light flicked on, he froze. There was someone, man, just standing halfway down the hallway, staring back at him. But the hallway was empty a second ago. How did he get in? Derek screamed and slammed the door shut, shoving his dresser against it. He called 911, trembling. The police arrived. They searched everything. The front door was still locked from the inside, no broken windows. But in the hallway, they found something chilling, an old maintenance key card, and a shoe print by the coat closet. Someone had been living in the empty crawl space next to the water heater for who knows how long.
With that said, thanks for watching. I hope these stories didn't scare you too much, but if they did, maybe that's a good thing. It means you're paying attention. If you have a story of your own that you'd like to share, you know where to send it. And don't forget to subscribe for more strange, dark, and mysterious stories delivered in a conversational style. Stay safe out there and always, always listen for the sounds that don't belong.